For 80 years, the stars belonged to the Skarn Concord. No human captain could deny it. No human fleet could challenge it. The Concord ruled 1,000 systems, and every one of those systems had learned the same lesson. Humans did not fight back. Humans ran, or humans died. It started with the Meridian Dawn, back when humanity had just begun reaching past its home system. The ship carried 300 colonists, families looking for a new world to call their own. A Skarn hunting cruiser found them near the edge of Concord space. The Skarn commander, a young officer named Threk Varan, was bored. His patrol had been quiet for weeks. When his sensors picked up the slow, unarmed human vessel, he saw an opportunity. He did not demand surrender. He did not ask questions. He simply opened fire, watched the ship break apart, and logged it in his personal record as a successful hunt. His superiors did not punish him. They congratulated him. The Skarn had encountered a species with no real weapons, no real defenses, and no real navy. Destroying human ships became a sport, a way for bored young officers to build their reputations. They called it the hunt, and they kept score. Over the decades, the hunt became tradition. Skarn cadets earned their first kill marks by finding lone human ships and ending them. Veteran captains competed for the highest kill counts, painting symbols on their hulls for every human vessel they destroyed. Human cargo ships, human survey ships, human refugee convoys fleeing dying colonies. It did not matter what the ship carried, or who was aboard. To the Skarn, humans were prey, and prey did not fight back. Humanity adapted the only way it could. It retreated. Colonies pulled back from the border systems. Trade routes bent themselves into long, careful detours around known Skarn hunting grounds. Every human captain memorized the patrol patterns of Skarn cruisers, the way sailors once memorized reefs and storms. Survival meant staying small, staying quiet, staying hidden. But quiet did not mean idle. On a moon called Perth's Rest, buried 3 kilometers under solid rock in a shipyard that did not appear on any official star chart, a woman named Elena Voss stood in front of a hologram of a ship that did not yet exist. She was 51 years old, with gray threading through her dark hair, and a scar along her jaw from a mining accident 20 years earlier. She had spent the last 12 years of her life on one project, and today, for the first time, she believed it might actually work. "Run the numbers again," she said. The engineer beside her, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Chen, sighed but tapped at his console. Numbers scrolled past on the display, streams of calculations describing stress tolerances, power curves, and drive efficiency ratios that no human ship had ever needed before. "Same as the last 4 times, Elena. The frame holds, the drive holds. On paper, this thing works." "On paper," Elena repeated. "That's how starships start," Marcus said. "On paper, then in metal, then, if we're lucky, in space." Elena walked closer to the hologram. The ship it displayed was unlike anything in the human fleet, unlike anything the Skarn had ever recorded in their extensive files on human technology, because the Skarn had never seen it. It was long and narrow, built with an asymmetrical hull that would have looked wrong to any traditional shipbuilder. Its weapons were not mounted in visible turrets. Its engines were not the standard fusion drives every scout and cruiser in the human fleet still used. They called it Project Impossible, because that was what everyone on Perth's Rest had said when Elena first proposed it. Impossible to build with the resources they had. Impossible to power without a Concorde-grade reactor. Impossible to hide from Skarn scans once it was finished. Impossible. Elena had kept the name. She thought it was fitting. Let the ship be called Impossible, until the day it proved everyone wrong. The project had begun after the destruction of the Callaway Star, a survey ship Elena's own daughter had served aboard. 22 crew, gone in less than 4 minutes, hunted down by a Skarn cruiser that logged the kill and moved on without a second thought. Elena remembered the message that told her Sarah was dead. She remembered how calm the Concorde's official statement had been, how it described the destruction as routine border security, with no mention of the fact that the Callaway Star had never carried a single weapon. She had grieved for exactly 1 month. Then she had gone to the highest levels of the Unified Human Assembly and demanded funding for something no human had ever tried before, a ship built not to survive the Skarn's rules, but to break them entirely. Most of the assembly had laughed her out of the chamber. War with the Concord was suicide. Everyone knew the numbers. The Skarn fleet outnumbered humanity's combined forces by a factor of 40 to 1. Their ships were faster, better armored, and crewed by warriors who had trained for combat since childhood. Humanity's best strategy, the assembly argued, was to stay hidden and hope the Skarn eventually grew bored of the hunt. But a handful of assembly members had lost people too. Sons, daughters, entire colonies. They had listened to Elena's proposal, not because they believed it would win a war, but because they were tired of losing one they had never agreed to fight. They gave her a hidden budget, a hidden shipyard, and 12 years to prove her idea was more than grief and anger dressed up as engineering. Now, standing in front of the hologram, Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. 12 years, countless failures. 3 complete redesigns, a crew of engineers who had aged alongside the project, some retiring, some dying, a few staying until the very end, because they believed, as she did, that humanity deserved better than running forever. "Talk me through the drive again," Elena said. "I want to hear it out loud before we commit to full construction." Marcus nodded and gestured at the hologram. The image shifted, zooming into the ship's core. "Standard human ships use fusion drives," he said. "Reliable, but slow, and they leave a heat signature a blind Skarn gunner could track from 3 systems away. Concord ships use compressed field drives, which are faster and quieter, but require exotic materials we've never had access to. And ours?" "Ours is neither," Marcus said. "We built something new, a folded resonance drive. Instead of pushing the ship through space with raw thrust, it briefly folds a small pocket of space around the hull and lets the ship slip through the fold. It's not true faster-than-light travel, not in the way the old science fiction writers imagined, but it moves the ship fast enough and quiet enough that Concord sensors read it as background noise instead of a starship. Because they've never seen it before," Elena said. "Exactly. Their scanners are built to recognize threats they already know. A Skarn cruiser can spot a fusion drive at extreme range and a compressed field drive almost as easily, because both leave signatures the Concord has cataloged for centuries. Our drive leaves a signature that looks like sensor error. Like noise, 9 times out of 10, they'll ignore it entirely." Elena studied the hologram in silence for a long moment. "And the 10th time?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "The 10th time, they'll investigate. And that's when we need everything else to work." Everything else meant the weapons, and the weapons were the second piece of the puzzle that had taken 12 years to solve. Human ships had always carried conventional armaments, railguns and missiles built to match the technology the Concord already understood and had learned to counter with ease. The Impossible carried something different, a swarm of self-guided nanite drones, each barely larger than a human fist, capable of latching onto an enemy hull and either disabling systems or, if given enough time, eating through armor entirely. The Skarn had never encountered anything like it. Their combat doctrine, refined over centuries of one-sided hunts, assumed an enemy that fought back with guns, not with a slow, spreading infestation that could cripple a ship from the inside before its crew even realized they were under attack. "There's still the matter of the crew," Elena said, turning away from the hologram. 41 volunteers, Marcus said. "All trained, all committed. Half of them lost someone to a hunt. The other half just want to prove it's possible to fight back." 41 people against the entire Concord. 41 people on one ship, Marcus corrected gently. "This isn't about winning a war today, Elena. It's about proving the war can be fought at all. Everything after that is someone else's problem." Elena nodded slowly. He was right, and she knew it, but the weight of it still settled heavily on her shoulders. 12 years of work, condensed into a single mission that would either change everything or end in the same silence that had swallowed every human ship the Skarn had ever hunted. 3 weeks later, construction was complete. The Impossible sat in its hidden dock, a long shadow of dark metal against the gray rock walls of the hollowed-out asteroid that had served as its birthplace. Elena stood on the observation platform above the dock, watching engineers make their final checks, watching the crew board one by one in their gray flight suits, each of them carrying the same mixture of fear and determination on their faces. Captain Aidan Reyes, the man chosen to command the ship, paused at the base of the boarding ramp and looked up at Elena. He was younger than she was, only 38, but he had flown more combat simulations against theoretical Skarn tactics than any other pilot in the human fleet. He had lost his older brother to a hunt 11 years earlier, a fact he rarely mentioned but never forgot. "Any final words, Dr. Voss?" he called up to her. Elena considered the question for a moment. Then she leaned over the railing. "Don't try to win the war today," she said. "Just prove it can be won." Aiden nodded once, a sharp, certain gesture, and turned to board his ship. Far across the galaxy, in a system the Concorde had designated Hunting Ground 17, a Skarn patrol squadron drifted lazily through the dark, their sensors scanning for the telltale signature of a human vessel. Their commander, a veteran hunter named Threk Varan, the same officer who had destroyed the Meridian Dawn decades earlier and never stopped hunting since, sat in his command chair, reviewing his kill count with quiet satisfaction. 211 confirmed human ship destructions. No Skarn commander in the history of the hunt had ever come close to matching it. He did not know that a ship called Impossible had just left its dock 3 systems away, moving toward his patrol route on a drive his sensors were not built to recognize. He would know soon enough. For now, the hunt continued as it always had, one-sided and unchallenged, the Skarn confident in their supremacy, humanity quiet and hidden in the dark, waiting for the moment everything would change. That moment was closer than anyone in the Concorde could have imagined. Elena watched from the observation platform as the massive dock doors ground open, revealing the endless black of space beyond. The Impossible's engines flared to life, a soft blue-white glow, unlike the harsh orange burn of a standard fusion drive. For a moment, the ship hung motionless in the opening, silhouetted against the stars. Then it moved, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It did not accelerate the way a fusion drive ship accelerated, with a visible push and a trail of heat. It simply seemed to fold forward, covering distance that should have taken minutes in the space of seconds, and then it was gone, swallowed by the dark, leaving nothing behind but a faint shimmer that faded almost as quickly as it appeared. 12 years of work, 41 lives, one ship. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time since her daughter's death, to hope. The Impossible was on its way, and somewhere out among the stars, the Skarn Concorde was about to learn that the hunt was not as one-sided as they believed. The era of human ships dying quietly, without resistance, without consequence, was about to end. What would come next, no one could say for certain, not even Elena, who had given more than a decade of her life to make this moment possible. But she knew one thing, with absolute certainty, as she watched the last shimmer of the Impossible's departure fade into the black. The Skarn had never lost a hunt. They were about to. Captain Aiden Reyes stood on the bridge of the Impossible and watched the stars slide past the viewport in silence. 3 days had passed since launch. 3 days of testing systems, running drills, and learning the strange rhythms of a ship unlike any other in human history. The bridge crew numbered 8. Aiden sat in the command chair, flanked by his pilot, a sharp-eyed young woman named Priya Nair, and his weapons officer, a broad, quiet man named Dmitry Kovacs, who had spent the last 6 years training with the nanite swarm systems, and knew them better than anyone alive. Behind them, at the sensor and communication stations, sat the rest of the bridge team, each one a volunteer. Each one carrying their own reasons for being aboard a ship most of humanity did not know existed. "Report," Aiden said, as he did every morning ship time. "Drive is holding steady," Priya said. "Fold efficiency at 94%, better than the simulations predicted. If this keeps up, we'll reach Hunting Ground 17, 2 days ahead of schedule. Nanite reserves at full capacity," Dmitry added. "All 12,000 units accounted for and synced to the swarm controller. I ran a dispersal test an hour ago. Response time was 0.3 seconds from command to full deployment. Sensors clean," said the young woman at the scan station. Naomi Osei, a former asteroid survey technician who had lost her entire mining crew to a hunt 4 years earlier. "No Skarn patrols within detection range. As far as their sensors are concerned, we don't exist." Aiden nodded, allowing himself a small measure of satisfaction. Every system was performing as designed, better than designed in some cases, but he knew better than to let comfort settle in. Simulations were simulations. The real test would come when they encountered an actual Skarn vessel, and no amount of preparation could fully account for the unpredictability of real combat. He thought back to the mission briefing Elena Voss had given the crew before launch. The Impossible's objective was not to seek out the largest Skarn fleet it could find and attempt some grand, decisive battle. That would be suicide, and everyone understood it. Instead, the mission was simpler, and in some ways, more difficult. Find a single Skarn hunting vessel, engage it, and win. Prove that human technology could defeat Skarn technology in single combat. Record everything. Then return home with evidence that the balance of power was not as fixed as either species believed. It sounded simple when Elena said it. Aiden knew it would be anything but. 3 more days passed. The crew fell into a rhythm, trading shifts, running further drills, checking and rechecking every system aboard the ship. Aiden used the time to study everything the human fleet had ever recorded about Skarn hunting tactics, poring over decades of survivor accounts, salvaged wreckage analysis, and the handful of intercepted Skarn communications that had ever been decoded. The picture that emerged was consistent and unsettling. Skarn hunting vessels operated in predictable patterns, locate a target, close distance quickly using their compressed field drives, open fire with railguns and plasma cannons before the target could react, and finish the engagement within minutes. Skarn ships were built for speed and aggression, not prolonged combat. Their armor was strong, but not impenetrable, optimized to withstand the kind of weak, outdated weaponry human ships had once carried, before humanity abandoned armed vessels almost entirely in favor of stealth and evasion. That was the gap Elena's team had identified 12 years earlier, the gap the Impossible had been built to exploit. Skarn ships had never needed to defend against nanite swarms, because no species they had ever hunted possessed such technology. Their armor, their sensors, their entire combat doctrine assumed an enemy that either fled or fired conventional weapons. The Impossible would do neither. On the 6th day, Naomi's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. Contact. Single vessel. Bearing 271. Mark 12. Distance, approximately 800,000 kilometers. Aiden's pulse quickened, though his voice remained level. Identify. Naomi's fingers moved rapidly across her console. Signature matches Skarn hunting cruiser classification. Medium size, single reactor core, standard railgun and plasma armament. This is it, Captain. This is a hunt ship. The bridge fell silent. Every crew member turned toward Aiden, waiting. He thought of his brother, gone 11 years, killed by a ship exactly like the one now drifting through space ahead of them, hunting for prey it did not know was about to become something else entirely. Bring us closer, Aiden said, slow and quiet. I want to observe their patrol pattern before we commit to anything. Priya guided the ship forward, using the folded resonance drive at its lowest, most subtle setting, a gentle drift rather than a leap. The Impossible closed the distance over the following hour, sliding through space like a shadow, invisible to Skarn sensors that had never been designed to notice it. Through the enhanced optical feed, the crew got their first real look at their enemy. The Skarn cruiser was sleek and predatory, its hull painted in the mottled gray and red markings of an active hunting vessel. Kill marks, small painted symbols representing every human ship it had destroyed, ran in neat rows along its forward hull. Aiden counted at least 40 before he made himself stop. That's the Ashen Talon, Naomi said quietly, cross-referencing the hull markings against the fleet's database of known Skarn vessels. Commander is logged as Threk Voron. Captain, this is the same commander who destroyed the Meridian Dawn. He's credited with over 200 confirmed kills. He's one of the most decorated hunters in the entire Concord. A tense silence settled over the bridge. Dimitri broke it first. Then taking him down would send a message no one in the Concord could ignore. Aiden considered this. Elena's mission parameters called for engaging any viable target, not seeking out specific commanders. But there was something fitting, something almost inevitable, about the idea that the ship that ended the era of unchallenged hunts might do so by defeating the very hunter who had begun it decades earlier. We proceed as planned, Aiden said finally. We don't change strategy based on pride. We engage because the opportunity is here, not because of who's flying that ship. Understood? The crew nodded, though Aiden could see the same thought reflected in several of their faces. Understood, but not forgotten. Dimitri, Walk me through the engagement plan one more time, Aiden said. Dmitri pulled up a tactical display showing the Impossible and the Ashen Talon as two glowing points separated by open space. We closed to optimal deployment range, roughly 15,000 kilometers, while remaining below their sensor threshold. At that range, we launched the nanite swarm in a wide dispersal pattern designed to approach from multiple vectors simultaneously. Their point defense systems are built to intercept missiles and railgun rounds, large, predictable objects moving in straight lines. The swarm units are small, agile, and capable of independent evasive maneuvers. Simulations suggest their defense grid will intercept no more than 15% of the swarm before the remainder reaches the hull. And once they reach the hull, the units split into two functions, Dmitri continued. Roughly 70% will target external systems, sensors, weapon mounts, engine components, anything that reduces their combat effectiveness immediately. The remaining 30% will begin breaching the hull itself, working through seams and access points to reach internal systems. Full system disable is estimated between 4 and 7 minutes after initial contact, depending on how quickly their crew attempts countermeasures. And if they detect the swarm before it reaches them, Dmitri's expression tightened. Then they'll have time to raise shields, if their vessel is shield-equipped, or attempt evasive maneuvers. Our simulations show even a full detection and response only reduces swarm effectiveness by 20%. The Ashen Talon simply isn't built to defend against this kind of attack. Nothing in the Concorde is. Aiden nodded slowly, absorbing the plan one final time. 12 years of engineering, encoded into a few minutes of calculated, silent violence. Take us to deployment range, he said. Nice and slow, Priya. We only get one chance to do this quietly. The Impossible crept forward through the dark, its folded resonance drive leaving barely a whisper of a signature behind it. Aboard the Ashen Talon, Threk Varan sat in his command chair, reviewing routine patrol logs, utterly unaware that a ship built specifically to end his career, and the era of hunts he represented, was closing the distance behind him. 15,000 kilometers. The number appeared on the tactical display, and Aiden felt the weight of the moment settle over the bridge like a held breath. Deployment range achieved, Priya said quietly. Aiden looked at Dmitri. Dmitri looked back, his hand hovering over the deployment controls, waiting for the order that would either prove 12 years of sacrifice worthwhile, or confirm every doubt the assembly had voiced when Elena first proposed her impossible ship. Deploy the swarm, Aiden said. Dmitri's fingers moved across the console. Deep within the Impossible's cargo bay, 12,000 nanite units activated simultaneously, spreading out from their launch tubes in a shimmering cloud, invisible against the black backdrop of space, moving toward the Ashen Talon in patterns too erratic and too small for any conventional sensor grid to properly track. On the bridge of the Ashen Talon, an alert chimed softly, easily dismissed, a minor sensor anomaly that Threk Varan's crew logged as background interference and continued their patrol without a second thought. They would not have that luxury for long. Aboard the Impossible, Aiden watched the swarm's progress on the tactical display, a slow, silent tide moving across open space toward an enemy that had no idea what was coming. Minute mark, Naomi called out. Swarm approaching outer detection threshold. Steady, Aiden said, though his own heartbeat had quickened. Let it work. 12 years of failures, redesigns, and quiet desperation had led to this single moment, thousands of kilometers from the nearest human colony, in a patch of empty space the Skarn had claimed as their own hunting ground for decades. The Ashen Talon continued its patrol, unaware, its kill marks gleaming faintly under the light of a distant star, its commander still confident in a supremacy that was, in this moment, already beginning to crumble. The hunt was about to change forever, and neither side yet fully understood how much. The first sign of trouble aboard the Ashen Talon came in the form of a flickering sensor panel, a small malfunction that the ship's junior technician, a young Skarn named Voska, dismissed as a routine maintenance issue. He logged it, filed a report, and returned his attention to his console. 90 seconds later, 3 more panels flickered. By the time Voska realized something was seriously wrong, the nanite swarm had already reached the hull. Aboard the Impossible, the bridge crew watched the tactical display in tense silence, as thousands of small green markers converged on the larger red shape representing the Ashen Talon. Dmitri narrated the swarm's progress in a low, steady voice, more for his own focus than for the benefit of the crew, who could see the display just as clearly as he could. Contact achieved. Units beginning system infiltration. External sensor array. Forward starboard. Offline. Point defense turret 2. Offline. Their point defense grid is trying to respond, but it's built to track large, slow objects. It's like trying to swat a swarm of gnats with a sledgehammer. On the Ashen Talon, alarms began sounding throughout the ship, first as isolated warnings, and then in a rapidly escalating cascade. Threk Varan rose from his command chair, his composure cracking for the first time in years. "Report," he demanded. "Unknown," his tactical officer shouted back, hands flying across a suddenly unresponsive console. "Multiple system failures across the hull. I'm reading dozens, no, hundreds of small contacts on the outer sensors, but nothing our targeting systems can lock onto. They're too small, too fast, moving independently." Threk stared at the tactical display, watching as one system after another flickered and died across his ship's schematic. In 211 hunts, he had never seen anything like it. Human ships fled. Human ships had no weapons. Human ships did not do this. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted. "Full power to engines. Get us clear of this area." But it was already too late. The nanite swarm had reached 70% hull saturation, and the units assigned to breach the outer plating were already working through access seams, weapon mounts, and sensor housings, methodically disabling every system they touched. The Ashen Talon lurched as its engines fired, but the response was sluggish, uneven. 2 of its 4 main thrusters had already gone dark, their control systems eaten through by the relentless invisible swarm. "Weapons," Threk snapped. "Find whoever is doing this, and destroy them." "I can't get a targeting lock," his weapons officer shouted back. "There's nothing to lock onto, sir, just the swarm itself, and it's too dispersed for a solid hit." Aboard the Impossible, Naomi's voice carried a note of disbelief as she reported the Ashen Talon's deteriorating condition. "Captain, their weapon systems just went dark. Both plasma cannons, offline. They still have railgun capability, but their targeting computer is barely functioning." "Keep the swarm working," Aiden said, though he could hear the tension beneath his own calm tone. "Dmitri, time to full disable?" 90 seconds, maybe less, Dmitri said. "They're falling apart faster than the simulations predicted. I don't think their ship was ever designed to withstand this kind of damage. They've never needed the redundancy." On the Ashen Talon, chaos had fully taken hold. Threk Varan stood in the center of his failing bridge, watching decades of unchallenged supremacy crumble around him in the span of a few brutal minutes. His crew scrambled between failing consoles, attempting emergency repairs that made no difference against an enemy they could not see, could not target, and did not understand. "Send a distress signal," Threk said, his voice tight. "Full priority, all Concord channels." "Communications array is offline, sir," came the reply. "We can't transmit." For the first time in his long career, Threk Varan understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what every human crew he had ever hunted must have felt in their final moments. Helpless, overwhelmed, betrayed by a universe that had promised them safety and delivered only silence. The realization did not bring him mercy, it brought him rage. "Ramming course," he roared. "If we cannot fight them, we will destroy them with our own hull." His helmsman worked frantically at a console that was barely responding, coaxing the last functional thruster into a desperate burn, aimed directly at the Impossible's projected position, invisible to the Ashen Talon's crippled sensors, but calculated from the last known bearing of the swarm's origin point. Aboard the Impossible, Naomi's warning cut sharply through the bridge. "Captain, they're changing course. Their trajectory puts them on a collision path with us in approximately 4 minutes." Aiden's jaw tightened. "Priya, can we outrun them?" "Easily," Priya said. "Their remaining thrusters are barely functional. We could be gone before they cover half the distance." "Do it," Aiden said. "Pull us back. Maintain observation distance. Dmitri, keep the swarm working. I want that ship fully disabled, not destroyed, if we can manage it." Dmitri glanced up, surprised. "Not destroyed, sir?" "We came here to prove a point, not commit slaughter," Aiden said. "If we can disable that ship and let its crew survive to report what happened here, The message lands harder than if we simply erase them from existence. Let the Concorde hear directly from the commander who survived an encounter with the impossible ship. Dmitri nodded slowly, understanding the logic even as the memory of his own losses stirred beneath the surface. He adjusted the swarm's parameters, shifting the emphasis away from structural breach and toward system disable. Careful, precise, sparing the crew quarters and life support, while methodically dismantling every weapon and engine system aboard the Ashen Talon. The Impossible drifted backward, maintaining safe distance, as Priya guided the ship with practiced ease, always staying just beyond the reach of the crippled Skarn cruiser's futile pursuit. Within minutes, the Ashen Talon's remaining thruster sputtered and died, leaving the ship adrift and powerless in open space, its hull scarred with the marks of thousands of tiny breach points, its weapons silent, its sensors blind. On the bridge of the Ashen Talon, Threk Varan slumped into his command chair, staring at the dead consoles surrounding him, the weight of an impossible defeat settling over him like a physical burden. 211 human ships, destroyed without a single meaningful loss on the Skarn side. And now, in the span of 6 minutes, everything he believed about the natural order of the universe had been shattered by a species he had spent his entire career treating as helpless prey. Aboard the Impossible, the bridge crew sat in stunned, quiet celebration, the kind of relief that came not from triumph, but from disbelief that the plan had actually worked exactly as designed. "Battle log complete," Naomi said softly. "Full sensor recording, full tactical data, everything captured from first contact to final disable. Captain, we have proof. Real proof that it can be done." Aiden allowed himself a slow exhale, the tension of the last hour finally beginning to release from his shoulders. "Send a compressed data burst back to Perth's Rest," he said. "Let Dr. Voss know it worked." "And the Ashen Talon?" Naomi asked. "Do we leave them here?" Aiden considered the drifting Skarn cruiser on the tactical display, powerless, its crew alive, but stranded far from any friendly support. He thought of his brother, of Sarah Voss, of every human life lost to ships exactly like this one, over 8 decades of one-sided hunts. "We leave them," he said finally. "Their emergency beacon will activate automatically once main power fails completely. A Concorde patrol will find them eventually. Let Threk Varan carry this story back to his people himself. Let him explain to his commanders exactly how a human ship defeated him without firing a single shot they could target." The crew nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. Mercy was not weakness. It was, in its own way, a message just as powerful as destruction would have been. The Impossible had proven it could destroy a Skarn hunting vessel completely if it chose to. Choosing not to sent a different, perhaps more unsettling signal entirely. Humanity was no longer simply fighting to survive. Humanity was choosing how this new chapter of the conflict would be written. As the Impossible folded away into the dark, its resonance drive carrying it silently back toward human space, Threk Varan remained aboard his crippled ship, staring out at the empty stars, waiting for rescue, and beginning, for the first time in his long career, to understand fear. Word of the Ashen Talon's fate would reach Concorde Command within days, carried first by rumor and confusion, then by Threk's own reluctant, humiliating report. The hunt, the tradition that had defined Skarn dominance over humanity for 80 years, had just suffered its first true defeat. It would not be the last. Back on Perth's Rest, Elena Voss received the compressed data burst late in the evening, sitting alone in her office, surrounded by 12 years of failed prototypes, discarded blueprints, and the quiet ghosts of every setback that had nearly convinced her to give up entirely. She opened the file with trembling hands and watched, for the first time, real footage of a Skarn hunting cruiser, rendered powerless by a ship humanity had built with nothing but desperation, ingenuity, and the memory of everyone the hunt had taken from them. Elena Voss closed her eyes, thought of her daughter, and allowed herself, at last, to cry. Not from grief this time. From something closer to hope. The news of the Ashen Talon's defeat spread through the Skarn Concorde, slowly at first, then all at once. Threk Varan's official report, filed under duress and heavily questioned by a review board that refused to believe his account, described an enemy vessel his sensors never fully detected, weapons his crew could not target, and a defeat so total it left his ship powerless, without a single hull breach large enough to be called conventional damage. The review board's first instinct was disbelief. Humans did not fight back. Humans had never fought back, not in 80 years of recorded hunts. Several senior officers suggested Threk had fabricated the story to cover some embarrassing malfunction or crew mutiny. It was easier to believe a decorated hunter had lied than to believe the natural order of the galaxy had shifted beneath their feet. That skepticism lasted exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, a second Skarn hunting vessel, patrolling a different sector nearly 40 light-years from the Ashen Talon's last known position, transmitted a garbled distress call before falling silent. When a Concord response fleet arrived, they found the ship drifting, powerless, its crew alive but shaken, describing an encounter disturbingly similar to Threk's account. Small, swift attackers, total system failure. No visible enemy vessel until it was already too late to respond. By the third confirmed incident, panic had begun to spread through Concord Command, quiet at first, whispered between officers who understood the implications far better than the general public did. The hunt had defined Skarn identity for generations. Entire military careers, entire cultural traditions, had been built on the assumption of absolute superiority over a defenseless species. If that assumption no longer held true, everything the Concord believed about its place among the stars was suddenly in question. Grand Admiral Kessia Thal, the highest-ranking military officer in the Concord's Northern Fleet Command, called an emergency session with her senior staff. She was old for a Skarn commander, well past the age when most retired from active duty, but her mind remained sharp, and her instincts had rarely failed her in over 60 years of service. 3 incidents, she said, standing before a star map that showed the locations of each attack marked in cold blue light. 3 of our vessels, disabled by an enemy, none of them could properly identify. I want theories, and I want them now. Her intelligence officer, a younger Skarn named Vesic Thorn, stepped forward. Admiral, based on the sensor fragments we've recovered, we believe humanity has developed some form of distributed micro-weapon system, small autonomous units capable of independent maneuvering and system infiltration. Our current defense architecture was never designed to counter something at this scale. How is that possible? Kessia demanded. Humanity has no shipyards capable of producing advanced technology at this level. Every survey we've conducted of their remaining territories shows nothing but outdated colony infrastructure and civilian transport vessels. With respect, Admiral, that assessment may no longer be accurate, Vesic said carefully. It's possible humanity has been developing this technology in secret for years, perhaps decades, hidden from our surveillance entirely. Kessia's expression darkened. The idea that an entire species the Concord had dismissed as harmless prey might have spent years quietly preparing for exactly this moment was not merely alarming. It was, in its own way, deeply humiliating. Recommendations, she said. We increase patrol density along the border regions, Vesic said. We recall isolated hunting vessels and consolidate them into larger, mutually supporting formations. And we begin developing countermeasures against small-scale infiltration weapons. Though that research will take time, we may not have. Time is precisely what we do not have, Kessia said. If word of these defeats spreads beyond our own command structure, it will not simply damage morale. It could unravel the entire foundation of the hunt as a tradition. Every young officer who has built a career chasing kill counts against a supposedly defenseless species will suddenly find themselves facing an enemy that fights back. That is not merely a tactical problem, Vesic. That is a crisis of identity for our entire military culture. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the assembled officers. There is another option, Kessia said finally. We stop treating this as isolated incidents and start treating it as what it actually is. A declaration. Admiral? Humanity has decided the hunt is over, Kessia said. They have built a weapon, or weapons, capable of ending our supremacy, and they have used it not once, but 3 times, each time choosing to disable rather than destroy. That is not the behavior of a desperate species lashing out in panic. That is the behavior of a species sending a very deliberate message. They want us to know they can fight back. They want us to know they choose, each time, whether we live or die. The implication hung heavy in the room. For 80 years, the Skarn had held the power of life and death over every human vessel they encountered. Now, in the span of a few weeks, that power had shifted, quietly and completely, into human hands. What message do we send in return? Vesic asked. Kessia's jaw tightened. We remind them why the Concorde has ruled 1,000 systems for longer than their species has known interstellar travel. We assemble a strike fleet, not a single hunting vessel, but a full battle group, more than capable of overwhelming whatever technology they have developed. We find this ship, or ships, responsible for these attacks, and we destroy them completely. No mercy, no survivors. Let that be humanity's answer to their little demonstration of defiance. Aboard the Impossible, Aiden Reyes and his crew had no immediate knowledge of the storm gathering within Concorde Command, but Elena Voss, monitoring intercepted Concorde communications from her office on Perth's Rest, understood exactly what was coming. They're mobilizing a strike fleet, she told Aiden during a secure transmission, 3 weeks after the Ashen Talon engagement. Intelligence estimates put the force at no fewer than 12 vessels, likely more, including at least 2 heavy cruisers. This isn't a hunting patrol anymore, Captain. This is a dedicated response force, built specifically to find and destroy you. Aiden absorbed the news in silence for a long moment, standing alone in his quarters aboard the Impossible, the weight of the mission settling more heavily on his shoulders than it ever had before. Do we have a location on this fleet? He asked finally. Not yet, Elena said, but Concorde communication patterns suggest they're consolidating in the border sector nearest to human space, likely preparing to sweep outward in a coordinated search pattern. If they follow standard doctrine, they'll begin with the systems closest to where the Ashen Talon was disabled. They think we're still operating in that area. For now, Elena said, but it won't take them long to widen the search. Aiden, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Is the Impossible ready to face a force of that size? Aiden considered the question carefully before answering. The ship had performed flawlessly against a single hunting cruiser, exceeding even the most optimistic projections from years of simulation. But 12 vessels, potentially more, coordinated and prepared for exactly the kind of attack that had defeated the Ashen Talon, presented a challenge of an entirely different magnitude. The swarm system is designed for single-target engagement, he said. Dividing our forces across 12 targets simultaneously would spread our resources too thin to guarantee full disable on any of them. If even a few ships remain combat-capable, they could overwhelm us with conventional firepower before the swarm finishes its work. Then what's your assessment? We can't fight 12 ships head-on, Aiden said. Not yet, but we don't have to. We built this ship to be invisible, Elena. If we can't win a fair fight, we don't give them one. Over the following days, Aiden and his crew developed a new strategy, born not from confidence, but from necessity. Rather than seeking direct confrontation with the assembling Concorde strike fleet, the Impossible would use its stealth capabilities to observe, gather intelligence, and identify vulnerabilities within the fleet's formation. If an opportunity arose to isolate and disable individual vessels without exposing the ship to the full weight of the fleet's combined firepower, they would take it. If not, they would wait, patient and unseen, until the moment was right. It was a strategy built on the same principle that had defined the entire Impossible project from its inception. Humanity could not match the Concorde in raw strength, but it could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast an enemy who had never needed to develop those skills against a prey species that had always simply run or died. 3 weeks later, Concorde sensor arrays detected an anomalous signature near the outer edge of Hunting Ground 17, the same sector where the Ashen Talon had first encountered the Impossible. Grand Admiral Kessia Thal, aboard her flagship at the heart of the newly assembled strike fleet, received the report with grim satisfaction. They've returned to familiar territory, she said. Overconfidence or arrogance. Either way, it ends the same. Bring the fleet to full alert. If this is the vessel responsible for our recent losses, I want it found, and I want it destroyed before it can cause further damage to Concorde prestige. 12 Skarn warships, including 2 heavy cruisers bristling with weapons far beyond anything the Ashen Talon had carried, began moving into a coordinated search pattern, sweeping the sector with a density of sensor coverage no single vessel could hope to slip past unnoticed. Aboard the Impossible, drifting silent and unseen at the very edge of the search grid, Naomi Osei watched the Concorde fleet's slow, methodical approach on her sensor display, her expression tight with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "Captain," she said quietly, "I think they know we're here." Aiden Reyes stood at the center of his bridge, watching the same display, the full weight of 12 Concorde warships closing in, around a single human vessel built from 12 years of desperate hope. "Then it's time we show them exactly what that means," he said. The battle that would decide the future of the hunt, and perhaps the future of humanity's place among the stars, was about to begin. 12 Skarn warships spread across the sector in a tightening formation, their combined sensor coverage forming a net designed to catch even the faintest anomaly. Aboard the Impossible, Aiden Reyes studied the tactical display in silence, watching the noose slowly close around his ship's position. "Options," he said quietly. Priya's hands moved across her console, calculating trajectory after trajectory, searching for any gap in the Concorde formation wide enough to slip through undetected. "Their coverage is nearly complete, Captain. There's a narrow window along the formation's southern edge, but it closes in 11 minutes as their heavy cruisers finish repositioning. And if we take it, we could withdraw," Priya said. "Live to fight another day." Aiden considered it. Retreat was the safe choice, the choice that preserved the ship, the crew, and everything Elena Voss had spent 12 years building. But retreat also meant the Concorde strike fleet remained intact, free to hunt for the impossible indefinitely, free to terrorize human colonies in the meantime, as a show of continued dominance. "Dmitri," Aiden said, "give me your honest assessment. Can we take this fleet?" Dmitri studied his own console for a long moment, before answering. "Not all 12 at once, not directly. Our swarm reserves are sufficient for maybe 3, perhaps 4 full disables before we're depleted. But Captain, I don't think we need to disable all 12 ships to win this fight. I think we only need to break their formation." Aiden's attention sharpened. "Explain." "Their entire search pattern depends on coordinated sensor coverage," Dmitri said. 12 ships, moving as one, sharing data to close every gap. "But if we can disable even 2 or 3 key vessels, especially the heavy cruisers coordinating the sensor net, the rest of the formation loses cohesion. They'll be forced to fall back on individual ship sensors, which we've already proven are inadequate against our drive signature and swarm units." "You're saying we don't have to beat the whole fleet," Aiden said slowly. "We just have to break it." "Exactly," Dmitri said. "Hit the flagship and 1 heavy cruiser hard enough to cripple their coordination, and the rest of the fleet becomes 12 individual targets instead of 1 unified net. Targets we've already proven we can handle 1 at a time." Aiden turned to the tactical display, studying the positions of Grand Admiral Kessia Thal's flagship and the 2 heavy cruisers anchoring the formation's sensor coverage. It was a bold plan, one that would require the Impossible to move dangerously close to the heart of the Concorde fleet, rather than remaining safely at its edges. "Do it," Aiden said. "Priya, plot a course that brings us within swarm range of the flagship and the nearest heavy cruiser, without crossing into direct visual detection range. Dmitri, prepare a full swarm deployment, split between both targets. Naomi, I want constant monitoring on the rest of the fleet. The moment they start reacting, I want to know." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each of them drawing on months of training and the hard-won confidence of their first successful engagement. The Impossible slipped forward through the gaps in the Concorde sensor net, its folded resonance drive carrying it in careful, deliberate increments, always staying just beneath the threshold of detection. Aboard her flagship, Grand Admiral Kessia Thal reviewed the latest sensor sweep with growing frustration. 11 hours of searching had produced nothing but the same faint anomalous readings that had first drawn the fleet to this sector, readings too inconsistent to represent a genuine contact. "Perhaps the enemy has already withdrawn," Vesic Thorn suggested carefully. "Or perhaps they are exactly as patient as their previous engagements suggest," Kessia replied. "Maintain full alert status. I will not repeat Threk Voron's mistake and assume silence means safety." Her instincts, honed over 60 years of service, proved sharper than her sensors. Deep within the folds of space her scanners could not properly penetrate, the Impossible closed to within swarm deployment range of both the flagship and its nearest heavy cruiser escort. "Deployment range achieved," Priya reported, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. Aiden looked to Dmitri. "Deploy." 12,000 nanite units surged from the Impossible's launch tubes, splitting into 2 coordinated swarms that spread across open space toward their targets. Unlike the single, methodical approach used against the Ashen Talon, this deployment was faster, more aggressive. born of necessity rather than patience. Time was the one resource the Impossible could not afford to waste, with 11 other Concorde warships within striking range. The first alerts began sounding aboard Kessia's flagship within 90 seconds. Small system anomalies that quickly cascaded into the same pattern of failures Threk Varan had described in his report weeks earlier. "Admiral, multiple system failures across the outer hull," Vesic shouted, his composure cracking under the sudden onslaught. "It's the same signature from Voron's report. They're here. They're attacking now." Kessia's expression hardened, 60 years of discipline holding steady, even as her ship began to fail around her. "All vessels, converge on our position immediately. Full sensor sweep, find their launch point." But the damage was already spreading too quickly for conventional countermeasures to address. Sensor arrays flickered and died. Weapon mounts fell silent one by one. The heavy cruiser alongside the flagship suffered the same fate simultaneously, its own systems collapsing under the relentless, invisible swarm. Across the rest of the Concorde formation, 10 remaining warships found themselves suddenly cut off from the coordinated sensor net that had defined their search pattern for the past 11 hours. Each captain, accustomed to relying on shared fleet-wide data, now faced the disorienting reality of operating on individual sensors that had never been designed to detect the Impossible's unique signature on their own. "Captain, the formation is breaking apart," Naomi reported, watching the Concorde fleet's cohesion crumble on her display. "Just like Dimitri predicted, they're falling back to defensive positions, but they've lost the ability to coordinate as a single unit." "Time to full disable on the flagship and cruiser?" Aiden asked. 90 seconds, Dimitri said. Aboard her dying flagship, Grand Admiral Kessia Thal stood amid failing consoles and panicked crew, confronting a truth that had shattered every assumption underlying 80 years of Skarn dominance. The hunt had always operated on a simple, unspoken premise. Humanity was prey, and the Concorde was predator, and that arrangement was as fixed and permanent as the stars themselves. That premise had just been proven false, decisively and completely, aboard her own flagship, in front of the largest strike force the Concorde had assembled specifically to reassert its supremacy. "Signal a full withdrawal," Kessia said quietly. "Admiral?" Vesic looked at her in disbelief. "You heard me," Kessia said, her voice heavy with the weight of a decision that would echo through Concorde history. "We came here to remind humanity of their place in this galaxy. Instead, we have learned something far more important about our own. Signal the withdrawal, Vesic. There is nothing left to prove here today, except how badly we misjudged our enemy." The remaining 10 Concorde warships, disorganized and increasingly vulnerable without their flagship's coordination, began pulling back from the search grid, their captains recognizing, even without direct orders, that continuing the engagement against an enemy they could neither detect nor effectively counter offered nothing but further humiliation. Aboard the Impossible, the crew watched the Concorde fleet's retreat with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. 12 warships, the largest Concorde force ever assembled specifically to hunt a single human vessel, had been broken and scattered in less than 10 minutes, without the Impossible ever coming within direct visual range of a single enemy ship. "They're retreating," Naomi said softly, as though she still did not quite believe the words herself. Aiden allowed himself a slow breath, the tension of the engagement finally beginning to release. "Status on the flagship and cruiser?" "Both fully disabled," Dimitri confirmed. "Weapons, sensors, and propulsion offline across both vessels. Crews alive, life support intact, same protocol as the Ashen Talon." "Send the recording back to Perth's Rest," Aiden said. "Full battle data, everything from deployment to Concorde withdrawal. Let Dr. Voss know the fleet broke." As the Impossible withdrew silently from the sector, folding away into the safety of the dark, word of the engagement began spreading through Concorde territory, with a speed and intensity that dwarfed even the initial reports of Threk Voron's defeat. A full strike fleet, humiliated and scattered by a single human vessel. A Grand Admiral's flagship disabled without ever identifying its attacker. The story moved through Concorde Command, through hunting squadrons across 1,000 systems, through the quiet conversations of officers who had built entire careers and identities around the assumption that humanity would always be prey and never predator. The hunt did not end immediately. Traditions 80 years in the making rarely collapse in a single day. and there remained those within the Concorde who dismissed the reports as exaggeration or misfortune, rather than evidence of a fundamental shift in the balance of power. But something had changed, irreversibly, in the way the Concorde approached human vessels from that day forward. Patrol formations grew larger and more cautious. Hunting cruisers, once eager to claim easy kills, began requesting reassignment to less contested sectors. The kill marks that had once been a source of pride among Scarn officers began to carry a different weight, a reminder not of easy victories, but of a species that had proven, decisively, that it would not remain prey forever. Back on Perth's Rest, Elena Voss stood once more on the observation platform above the hidden shipyard, watching the Impossible's return through the same dock doors it had departed from months earlier. The ship bore no visible damage, no scars from a battle against 12 Concorde warships, only the quiet, understated confidence of a vessel that had done exactly what it was built to do. Captain Aidan Reyes descended the boarding ramp to find Elena waiting for him, her expression carrying a complicated mixture of relief, pride, and the lingering weight of grief that 12 years of work had never fully erased. "You broke their fleet," she said. "We broke their confidence," Aidan corrected gently. "The fleet will rebuild. Confidence takes longer." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the distinction, understanding that the war for humanity's future among the stars had not ended today, would not end for years, perhaps decades to come. But something essential had shifted, something that could not be undone, regardless of how the Concorde chose to respond in the months ahead. The era of human ships dying quietly, without resistance, without consequence, had ended. What replaced it remained uncertain, contested, and dangerous, a new chapter, in a story that had only just begun. But for the first time in 80 years, that story would be written with humanity holding a pen of its own, no longer merely prey waiting silently for the next hunt, but a species that had proven, against every impossible odd stacked against it, that it could fight back and win. Elena looked past Aidan to the ship behind him, the ship that had once been dismissed as impossible by nearly everyone who heard the proposal, the ship that now sat quietly in its dock, having done exactly what its name promised. "What happens now?" Aidan asked. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile, the same smile she had worn the night the first data burst arrived from the Ashen Talon engagement, the smile of someone who had spent 12 years proving the impossible could become real. "Now," she said, "we build more." Somewhere among the 1,000 systems of the Scarn Concorde, officers who had once hunted human ships for sport were beginning, for the first time, to understand fear. And somewhere in the quiet dark between the stars, humanity was just getting started.